Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really powerful idea at the heart of modern healthcare: cultural competence. We're going to break down what it is, why it's so important, and look at the gap between our best intentions and what actually happens with patients.
All right, to get into this, we first have to understand what's really at stake. Why is this conversation about culture and medicine so incredibly urgent? Well, it all boils down to the most fundamental thing in medicine: trust.
Just let that sink in for a second. This quote from a major review says it all. When a patient feels like they aren't seen or they're disrespected because of their background, this isn't just about hurt feelings. We're talking about people who might avoid going to the doctor entirely. And that creates this huge, dangerous gap in care that directly fuels the health disparities we see all around us. It's a massive problem, and one healthcare is desperately trying to solve.
So, to even begin to tackle this empathy gap, a whole field of study has popped up. And, like any specialized field, it's got its own vocabulary. To really get what's going on, we all need to be speaking the same language. So let's break down some of the most important terms. First up, the word culture itself. Now, in this context, it's so much more than just nationality or ethnicity. Think of it as the entire complex tapestry of how a group of people lives. It's their language, their beliefs, their customs. It's really the lens through which they see and interact with the world.
And then there's competence. This isn't about becoming an expert on every single culture on the planet. I mean, that would be impossible, right? Instead, it's about having the ability to function effectively, to engage respectfully within the cultural world of a patient and their community.
Okay, so put those two together and you get cultural competency. This is the big goal. It's like having a toolkit, a set of awareness, attitudes, and skills that lets healthcare professionals and even entire hospitals work successfully across different cultures, bridging those potential gaps in understanding.
Now we get to a really crucial concept: implicit bias. The best way to think about this is like mental shortcuts our brains create on autopilot. And here's the thing, we all have them. They're these unconscious stereotypes and attitudes that can shape our judgments and actions without us even knowing it's happened. And it is so important to separate this from explicit bias. Explicit bias is conscious. It's deliberate prejudice that someone is aware of. Implicit bias, though, that works in the background. It can cause really well-meaning people to act in ways that don't match up with their own deeply held values.
Once you recognize your own potential for bias, it allows for this really profound shift in how you see people. You can move away from what's called a deficit lens, where you might see a patient's background, say living in a rural area, as just a disadvantage or a barrier. Instead, you can adopt a strength-based approach, which recognizes the incredible resilience, the unique knowledge, and the abilities that come from their life experiences.
Okay, so if that's the mindset we're aiming for, how in the world do you build it? Let's take a look at how medical schools and hospitals are actually trying to teach these skills to doctors, nurses, and all their healthcare staff. Researchers have pretty much laid out a prescription for success, and they argue that for this training to work, it can't just be a boring lecture. No, it has to be interactive. We're talking about things like role-playing with actors. It needs to teach actual, practical skills, not just having people memorize lists of cultural stereotypes. And maybe most importantly, it has to be woven into the day-to-day clinical work, not just a one-off seminar. And none of it works without strong support from the very top.
And right here, you can see how that big picture strategy translates into what a healthcare worker actually does on a Tuesday afternoon. It's about constantly being aware of your own assumptions. It's using respectful person-first language. It's about fighting for your patient when they have to deal with a super complex system. And it really drives home that this isn't a one-and-done thing. It's a journey of continuous, lifelong learning. But, and this is a big but, here's the million-dollar question. With all of this energy, all these resources being poured into training, is it actually making a difference? This is where the story gets a little more complicated.
I mean, there's no denying it. So many hospitals, universities, and healthcare systems have jumped on board with these training programs. They're seen by many as the key tool for fixing those persistent and really troubling gaps in health outcomes between different groups of people. But here's the reality check. A huge scoping review of all the research published in 2022 came to a pretty sobering conclusion. Right now, there is very little, if any, hard evidence that proves these training programs actually change a provider's behavior in the long run, or more importantly, that they lead to better health outcomes for patients. Making someone aware of a problem is one thing, but changing what they do is something else entirely.
This lack of clear impact from training suggests the problem might be bigger, more systemic. So, where else can we look? Well, one place is leadership. Take this chart, for example. It's from a study on the Indian Society of Nephrology. And look at that, a huge gender gap in its decision-making committees. 47 men to just 16 women. It begs the question, if the people setting the policies don't reflect the diversity of the population, how can we possibly expect a training program alone to fix the whole system?
And these systemic issues get even deeper. As we try to fix one problem, like the lack of diversity in medical research, we have to be careful not to create new ones. That's what organizations like the MRCT Center at Brigham and Women's and Harvard are focused on. They remind us that pushing for more diversity is crucial, but it has to be done ethically, with really strong safeguards in place so that including diverse communities doesn't turn into exploiting them.
So here's the main takeaway. A one-off training session or a nicely worded policy, it's just not a silver bullet. The evidence is telling us that if we're really serious about transforming healthcare, we need a much bigger, more integrated approach.
When you pull all this research together, a clearer path forward starts to take shape, and it looks like a three-part strategy. First, it has to start with individual commitment. That's the personal work of self-reflection. But that can't happen in a vacuum. It needs to be supported by institutional accountability. That means clear goals, things you can actually measure, diverse leadership, and treating this as a core value, not just a checkbox on an HR form. And finally, it requires systemic advocacy, actively working to tear down the structural barriers that create inequity in the first place.
And that leaves us with one last critical question. And it doesn't just apply to healthcare, but to any organization. To get past the good intentions, to move beyond policies that just look good on paper and toward real, measurable change, it's going to take action at every single level. So what's the one concrete action that you, your team, or your institution can take to truly start bridging that gap?